6 lives, including rock star Daniel Williams of The Devil Wears Prada, were extinguished in an instant over a quiet San Diego suburb. Their business jet was in perfect working order, and at the controls was a seasoned pilot, Dave Shapiro. So why did this routine overnight flight end in a fiery hell right in the middle of a residential neighborhood? We're going to reconstruct the timeline of Flight N666DS minute by minute to reveal the invisible killer. One more terrifying than any engine failure. An enemy that lives inside every single one of us. On the tarmac at Teterboro Airport, the predatory silhouette of a Cessna Citation II sits motionless. On its tail, a defiant registration number, N666DS. This bold set of characters seems to challenge superstition, but its 42-year-old owner and pilot, Dave Shapiro, trusts only his instruments. The 21st of May, 2025, is drawing to a close, but for the people on board, the night is just getting started. 5 passengers climb into the cabin, including the man we just mentioned, drummer Daniel Williams. The group is returning from a music event, and the air is thick with the faint scent of adrenaline and success. The crew's mood is professional. The pilot's movements in the cockpit are relaxed, yet precise. The flight plan is ambitious. The jet is about to cross the entire country. At exactly 11:10 p.m., the growing whine of the turbines shatters the New Jersey silence. The jet accelerates and climbs confidently into the inky East Coast sky, leaving the city lights far below. No one on board knows it yet, but this routine takeoff has just set in motion an irreversible chain of events. 3 hours of darkness turn the cockpit into a glowing cage of solitude, where the hum of the turbines becomes almost hypnotic. Below lies the heartland of America, wrapped in a deep sleep, as the Cessna 550 cuts through the silence over the state of Kansas. They're descending for a landing in Wichita, at Colonel James Jabara Airport. The landing gear touches the concrete in complete darkness, the only guide in this void being the dim runway lights. This is just a technical stop, a brief respite in a continent-spanning marathon to feed the jet's thirsty tanks. As ground crews connect the hoses, the sharp smell of kerosene mixes with the cool night air. The passengers might be stepping out to stretch their stiff legs, their voices hushed so as not to break the spell of the night. But look at Dave Shapiro. He's 42. He's experienced. But right now he's fighting an enemy far more insidious than any storm front. The pilot is personally overseeing the refueling, his eyes scanning the gauges. He's rushing, pushing for the quickest possible turnaround. But you can't trick biology with a flight plan. Dave's body is slipping into what's known as the circadian trough, that dangerous window in the dead of night when human alertness plummets. His brain is demanding rest, his reactions are becoming sluggish, and the line between focus and a stupor is starting to blur. This is the witching hour for any aviator. But the schedule has its own demands. At exactly 2:36 a.m. Central Daylight Time, the engines roar to life again, tearing through the sleepy silence of the airfield. The jet rapidly accelerates and lifts off from the solid ground. The lights of Wichita instantly dissolve behind them. Ahead lies nothing but the endless, unlit blackness of the western plains and the final, grueling push to the Pacific coast. Imagine for a second. You are the only living, conscious mind in a cramped metal capsule, hurtling through an icy vacuum. The Cessna levels off at its cruising altitude over the desolate expanses of the American West, and here, 7 miles up, a scenario that safety experts call the quiet killer begins to unfold. The cockpit is filled with a ringing, unnatural solitude. Dave Shapiro is completely alone. The aircraft's type certificate allows him to fly this jet solo, but right now, that rule is working against him. To his right, a chillingly empty seat. There's no one to tap him on the shoulder, no one to offer a coffee, no one to notice his blinks becoming dangerously long. Behind a thin partition, the passengers, worn out by the overnight journey, are fast asleep, completely unaware that their fate is hanging by the single, frayed thread of one extremely tired neural network. Look at the situation through the eyes of an aviation physiologist. Outside, an inky abyss. No city lights, no moon, no horizon line for the eyes to lock onto. In this state of total sensory deprivation, the steady drone of the turbines acts like a hypnotic metronome. Dave's biological clock is approaching 6 a.m., a critical point. This is the very bottom of the circadian cycle, when body temperature drops and sleep hormones literally flood the brain, demanding an immediate system shutdown. The fatigue, built up over a long day, turns the simple act of staying awake into a form of sophisticated torture. The most terrifying part is that the plane is flying perfectly. It's a classic false sense of security. The autopilot holds the course with an iron grip, creating an illusion of total control. The radio is silent, air traffic controllers aren't calling, and this silence becomes deafening. The pilot has nothing to react to, nothing to correct. His eyes might still be open, the instruments glowing with a soft, reassuring green light, but his brain, starved of tasks and external stimuli, is finally surrendering to nature. Tonight, the Pacific breeze doesn't bring freshness. It's building a solid, impenetrable wall of death directly in the jet's path. As Dave tries to shake off the sticky, paralyzing grogginess of the long flight, Southern California's nature is springing its most insidious trap, an atmospheric phenomenon known to locals as the marine layer. This isn't just cloud cover. It's a dense, moisture-saturated fog that silently creeps in from the ocean after dark, blanketing the coast in a heavy, leaden shroud. The city of San Diego, which should have greeted them with a scattering of welcoming lights, has been literally wiped off the face of the earth. Look at the situation from a safety perspective. The cloud base is hanging at just 200 feet. Imagine the roof of a 20-story building. Everything above that point is submerged in a solid gray soup. Visibility at ground level has plummeted to a critical half-mile, just 2,600 feet. For a tired business jet pilot, these are borderline conditions, a dangerous balancing act on the very edge of legal minimums. Any error in setting the altimeter or a split second of hesitation here is a guaranteed collision with terrain that you won't see until the very last moment. The final nail in this coffin is the geography. The destination airfield, Montgomery Gibbs, isn't on a safe, flat plain. It's perched on a treacherous plateau, surrounded by hills that are now hidden in the impenetrable milk. In his headset, the monotonous, dispassionate voice of the ATIS information system confirms his worst fears. Logic should be screaming, "Go around," to divert to an alternate airport. There's enough fuel to fly further inland. But this is where a classic psychological trap snaps shut. Shapiro, exhausted by the sleepless night, falls victim to tunnel vision. The desire to finish the flight is overriding his instinct for self-preservation. Without hesitation, he confirms the approach and points the nose of the aircraft down into the gray abyss. At 3:41 a.m., the calm voice of a controller begins the final countdown. The SoCal approach frequency comes alive in Dave Shapiro's headset, and it's the last human contact connecting the aircraft to the safety of reality. The controller issues a clear instruction. Cleared for the RNA VGPS approach to runway 28 right. This isn't a visual approach, where a pilot looks for the asphalt with his own eyes. It's a strict instrument flight, a mathematically precise glide along an invisible digital thread through the atmospheric chaos. Shapiro keys his mic and confirms the instructions, his voice betraying nothing but a dry, tired professionalism. Exactly 1 minute later, at 3:42, a transmission cuts the final thread of the safety net. Frequency change approved. This is a critical pressure point. Dave switches his radio to the CTAF tower frequency, but he's met with only an oppressive silence. At night, the tower at Montgomery Gibbs is dead. The glass cab is dark. The chairs are empty. The radars are off. This is now uncontrolled airspace, where the pilot is solely responsible for his own fate and his separation from the ground. The Cessna finally plunges into the wet, impenetrable cotton of the clouds. Picture the view from the cockpit. The stars vanish beyond the windscreen, and the powerful strobe lights begin to blind him, reflecting off the dense fog directly into his eyes. Visual contact with the world is completely lost. There is no more horizon, no city lights, no familiar sense of up and down. Dave is now locked in the glowing cocoon of his cockpit, alone with the numbers on his displays. The safety of his passengers now depends entirely on his discipline to trust the cold, hard data of his instruments, ignoring the instincts of his own body, which, in total darkness, will inevitably lose its orientation. The numbers on the altimeter are, right now, turning from simple statistics into a silent verdict. They're on the final approach now, just 2.9 nautical miles from the runway threshold. Navigation charts mark this critical boundary as the Palos waypoint. This isn't just a name on a screen, it's a strict altitude gate. The rules require crossing it at a minimum of 1,380 feet to guarantee safe clearance over any obstacles in this hilly sector. But look at the telemetry data, which cannot lie. Flight N666DS crosses this invisible line at an actual altitude of 1,190 feet. The deviation is a critical 190 feet, nearly the height of a 20-story building, which is now missing from their safety margin. The aircraft is flying significantly below the glide slope, sinking beneath the calculated flight path. This is an insidious trick of perception. To the tired pilot, it feels like he's in complete control of the descent, but in reality, he's flying the plane far too low, violating the approach profile. The paradox of this moment is that inside the cockpit, the flight feels completely normal. The speed is stable, the needle is fixed at 120 knots. The aircraft's movements are smooth, with no bumps or turbulence. This illusion of stability is enough to lull away any last shred of vigilance. The electronic voice of the TAWS warning system, the one that should be screaming a warning right now, is silent, due to specific sensitivity settings or the unique terrain below. The descent continues through a dense, impenetrable fog. The pilot keeps peering into the gray gloom outside the cockpit, desperately trying to spot any sign of the approach lights, while the aircraft steadily loses altitude in zero visibility conditions. At 3:46 and 30 seconds, the dead silence on the radio is shattered, not by a human voice, but by a frantic, mechanical clicking. Dave Shapiro makes what might be his last conscious move in this fight against the fog. He activates the PCL system, the pilot-controlled lighting. At huge international hubs, the runway lights burn around the clock, but here, at this small, sleeping airfield, the pilot is his own electrician. The rule is strict. 7 quick clicks of the mic button within 5 seconds switches the runway lights to their maximum intensity. Listen to those 7 dry clicks in the headset. Right now, this isn't just a standard pre-landing procedure. It's a pure act of desperation. The pilot is trying to punch through the thick veil of the marine layer with a powerful blast of light, hoping the runway will flare up ahead like a saving grace. But San Diego's treacherous geography has a trap waiting for them. Between the descending jet and the airfield lies Murphy Canyon, a deep, completely dark chasm in the landscape. For aviators, this creates the dangerous black hole illusion. When there's nothing but blackness between you and the runway lights, the human eye loses its ability to judge height and distance. Dave is glued to the windshield, searching for any glimmer of hope. The runway is just 2 miles ahead, on the next hill. Technically, the signal went through perfectly. Up ahead, the lights have indeed erupted into a brilliant array, bathing the wet concrete in light. But the horror of the situation is that from their current, dangerously low altitude, it's physically impossible to see that glow. The fog and the terrain have securely hidden the airfield from the crew's view. Their altitude continues to drop relentlessly as the plane sinks into the dark canyon, yet the pilot still believes the lights are about to appear straight ahead. 3:47 in the morning transforms this quiet, fog-shrouded suburb into the epicenter of a sudden, blinding nightmare. We are now directly over a dense residential area east of the airfield, where, instead of the long-awaited concrete of the runway, deadly obstacles emerge from the gray haze. High-voltage power lines now stand directly in the path of the rapidly descending jet. The altimeter at this moment might have read just 90 feet, the height of a 9-story building, but there is no time left to look at the instruments. With a monstrous shriek of metal, the left wing and tail stabilizer tear into the taut steel web of the power lines. See this through the eyes of a random witness on the ground. The damp air erupts in a brilliant electrical discharge. A giant arc, born from the short circuit, bathes the neighborhood in a deathly pale light for a fraction of a second, snatching the silhouette of the dying machine from the darkness. This isn't just a collision. It's an instant amputation of the aircraft's ability to fly. The impact shatters the plane's airframe in mid-air. The aerodynamics that had kept them safe for thousands of miles now betray the crew. The lift on the left wing vanishes as if someone flipped a switch. The crippled Cessna is no longer responding to the controls. It rolls sharply, sickeningly, onto its left side, entering an uncontrollable slide. Pilot Shapiro, who just a second ago was in command of a complex piece of machinery, is now a hostage in a falling metal capsule. The jet is hurtling toward the ground at over 120 miles per hour, the lethal energy of a race car hitting a wall. Mangled metal, shedding pieces of its skin, arcs steeply downward, only to shatter the sleeping neighborhood with the sound of the inevitable, final catastrophe. Gravity claims its prize in the heart of a quiet residential block. The mangled fuselage, no longer an aircraft but a heavy projectile, slams into a single-story house in a military housing sector. It's a kinetic strike of terrifying precision. Wood, glass, and concrete disintegrate instantly under the crushing impulse of the engines, but the physical impact is just the detonator. The real horror is liquid. Tons of jet fuel, still sloshing in the ruptured tanks and meant for a cross-country flight, instantly vaporize and ignite on contact with the ground. A massive, blinding fireball blooms, defying the damp night air. It expands with the fury of a tactical strike, consuming not only the epicenter, but also greedily licking at the siding of neighboring buildings. Inside these homes, residents, military families, are torn from a deep sleep into a living nightmare. They don't hear the impact first. They feel it in their chests. A brutal shockwave rips through the neighborhood, blowing out windows and blasting doors open for a block in every direction. The peaceful street is instantly transformed into a zone of chaotic, fiery mayhem. Thick, oily smoke chokes the streetlights, turning the night into a suffocating orange haze. Residents run out onto their lawns, disoriented and terrified, driven by a primal instinct to flee the unbearable heat. The scene is surreal and terrifyingly wrong. Jagged pieces of the aircraft, torn aluminum skin, twisted hydraulic lines, and engine cowlings are scattered across manicured yards like sinister decorations. The air smells of burning chemicals and fear. Amid the roar of the consuming flames, the neighborhood realizes that a danger usually associated with distant training grounds has suddenly fallen from the sky, turning their sanctuary into ground zero. Through the furious crackle of the flames, a sound of salvation cuts through, the piercing, rising wail of sirens. San Diego fire crews charge into this inferno just minutes after the crash, operating with chilling efficiency. The situation is critical. Dispatchers immediately escalate the incident to a third alarm, the highest level of response. The street fills with flashing red lights, but even their glow is swallowed by the monstrous blaze. The scene that greets the first responders is like something from a war zone. The epicenter pulses with blinding heat. The fire is no longer just burning. It's devouring adjacent homes and melting the metal of parked cars. Let's shift our focus to the perimeter, where medics are setting up a triage station right on the lawns. In the acrid smoke and soot, rescuers evacuate residents, many of whom are in a state of profound shock. 8 people, ordinary military families who were sleeping just moments ago, now need emergency medical attention for burns of varying degrees and injuries from the blast wave. It's a desperate race against time, in conditions where the air is thick with toxic fumes and the heat is intense enough to melt the firefighters' protective gear. In the heart of the furnace, fire hoses attack the burning jet fuel with tons of specialized foam. A white chemical blanket covers what's left of the sleek business jet, layer by layer. But as the flames begin to retreat, a heavy, cold realization sets in. The firefighters see only a shapeless heap of mangled aluminum where the cockpit should be. No one is rushing to the fuselage with hydraulic cutters to rescue anyone inside. The nature of the destruction and the intensity of the fire have made a brutal, final statement. For the crew and passengers, this flight ended instantly. As the first rays of sunlight touch the smoldering ruins, the fire is fully contained, leaving the neighborhood in the silence of the aftermath. When the acrid smoke finally clears, the silence over the ashes begins to sound much louder than any emergency siren. Investigators move through the cooling debris with grim caution to officially confirm the inevitable. This flight was a one-way ticket for all 6 people on board. The fire that had raged here just minutes before did its horrific work, leaving no chance for visual identification. Now, experts face the long, emotionally taxing process of cross-referencing dental records, the only reliable way to give names back to those so suddenly taken by the disaster. Meanwhile, news feeds are already pulsing with breaking alerts. The news of the famous musicians' deaths spreads through the internet instantly, and the online community freezes in shock. The eyes of millions are immediately drawn to one chilling detail: the tail number N666DS. In comments and on forums, this code instantly becomes shrouded in mystique. Fans call it a cursed mark and a dark omen that, in their view, doomed the business jet to crash before it even left New Jersey. But at the very epicenter of the destruction lies a true miracle, one that defies all probability. Look at the house that took the monstrous kinetic impact. The plane literally wiped the building off the face of the earth, turning it into a crater, but there was no one inside. The family living there, by a stroke of pure luck, was away. Tons of burning metal and fuel crashed into an empty space, taking not a single life on the ground, something that seems incredible in such a densely populated area. Now, emotions give way to strict federal protocol. The neighborhood falls under the total control of military police and NTSB agents. The perimeter is sealed tight with yellow tape. Access for civilians and the press is completely cut off. The most important and meticulous phase begins: the collection of physical evidence. Investigators mark every charred fragment, every scratch on the asphalt with small flags, transforming the chaotic scene of the tragedy into a vast, open-air laboratory. The ghost of the doomed jet rises from the ashes, not from the smoldering ruins, but on the flickering monitors in the cool silence of the NTSB lab. Experts painstakingly load flight radar data, and a terrifyingly accurate 3D model of the tragedy's final minutes takes shape before our eyes. This digital animation instantly dismisses all theories of a technical malfunction or engine failure. The flight path on the screen doesn't look like a chaotic plunge. It shows a conscious but fatal choice. What investigators see on the graph is a distinctive jagged descent profile, a textbook example of a prohibited maneuver known as the duck under. To understand what this means, the pilot, in blatant violation of the strictest instrument flight rules, or IFR, deliberately drops below the minimum safe altitude before he even has eyes on the runway. He's literally trying to duck under a thick layer of clouds to get a visual on the ground, instead of trusting the cold, hard logic of his altimeter. It's a desperate gamble to cheat the weather, and it cost everyone on board their lives. The computer model is ruthless in its precision. At the moment of impact, the aircraft was criminally low, cutting every conceivable safety margin in an area of challenging hilly terrain. On the virtual route map, those same power lines are clearly marked. Now, critics might argue that the wires didn't have warning lights, but for a professional investigation, that's no excuse. The high-voltage line was drawn as a bold line on all the navigation charts and approach plates. The pilot was simply looking out into the darkness, not at his map. The Commission's final conclusion sounds clinical, but it hits like a punch to the gut. The cause of the crash was CFIT, or controlled flight into terrain. It's the most tragic finding in all of aviation. It means that a perfectly airworthy aircraft, with engines running and full tanks of fuel, was flown by a steady hand straight into oblivion. Imagine a pilot trying to land a highly complex jet after downing 3 shots of whiskey. Except this pilot was completely sober. The NTSB's medical team, after breaking down Dave Shapiro's schedule minute by minute, arrived at this exact chilling comparison. The flight out of New Jersey took off after he'd already put in a full day's work. By the time of the impact, the captain had been awake for more than 18 consecutive hours. This isn't just fatigue, it's a physiological collapse. For his body, still running on East Coast time, it was the dead of night, that critical window of circadian low when the brain starts shutting down higher cognitive functions to force the body to sleep. Studies have proven that this level of acute sleep deprivation impairs psychomotor skills and risk assessment abilities to the same degree as alcohol intoxication. Dave becomes a victim of tunnel vision, a terrifying state where peripheral awareness vanishes and reality shrinks to the size of a pinhead. He can physically see the numbers on his altimeter, but his exhausted mind simply doesn't sound the alarm. It perceives the critically low altitude as normal. The risk assessment that normally keeps a pilot alive is now completely paralyzed by the chemistry of his fatigued brain, which is incapable of recognizing the fatal error. And the final nail in the coffin is a psychological phenomenon known in aviation as get-home-itis, a manic, irrational drive to just get the flight over with. The proximity of home acts like a drug. The pilot's subconscious is willing to break any rule, duck under the clouds, and ignore all common sense just to be able to hit the pillow that much sooner. Safety is sacrificed for the illusion of comfort. And this crash becomes a textbook case of CFIT, forever cementing Flight N666DS into the darkest chapters of textbooks on human factors.